Okay, so yesterday I posted in the announcements about Tropical Storm Arthur, that on Monday didn't make landfall but brushed past the coast of North Carolina. And in the announcements, I included a couple of videos where you could see the effects of Tropical Storm Arthur. Nothing major, but it's still notable because we're only in May and this isn't the start of hurricane season yet in the Atlantic, but we're starting to see some tropical activity. One of the videos does mention, however, that this has happened before where we've had hurricanes prior to hurricane season. I believe there's 6 other named tropical storms that formed in the Atlantic Ocean prior to June. So, some scientists believe that we're in for a very active hurricane season in the Atlantic, and other scientists say, well, just because we're seeing some activity now doesn't mean that we're in for an active season. So, time will just tell what direction we go in. But I figured since we're starting to hear about these tropical storms on the news, that it would be a good idea to take a break from the space topics and go into some hurricane talk today and tomorrow. Just so as we move into the summer and even after you say goodbye to me and 6th grade ends, when a hurricane occurs, you'll be like, oh, I remember learning about that. So today I thought we'd talk about some of the interesting aspects of a hurricane in terms of how are they measured, how are they named, where did that come from, what are the names that we're going to see on the hurricane list this year, and also talk about the differences between tropical storm, tropical depression, hurricane, and also watches and warnings, because these are things that you'll hear on the news and you're like, what's really the difference between any of them? So I have a bunch of sites pulled up here, and I figured I would just kind of condense some of the information for you. So first of all, the interesting thing is when you listen to the news, sometimes you hear about a tropical storm or a tropical depression or a hurricane. And you're thinking, what's the difference between them? Arthur, that I posted about yesterday, was a tropical storm. So here's what this means. A tropical depression is when something is forming in the ocean with speeds anywhere from up to 38 miles per hour. So those are going to be the maximum speeds. And they're sustained speeds. And by sustained speeds, meaning for at least a minute, they're maintaining that speed of 38 miles per hour. A tropical storm is now when we see speeds of 39 to 73 miles per hour. This is where storms are going to be named. And this is where we'll see some damage associated with the storms. High winds, flooding rains. So a tropical storm is more serious than a depression. A depression is when they kind of keep an eye out and say, okay, something's forming in the ocean. It's got winds of 38 miles per hour. This could turn into something bigger. So let's watch it. Let's see what happens to it. Let's start to track it. When it becomes the tropical storm, between 39 and 73 miles per hour, they know these storms are likely to carry some kind of damage from wind and flooding rains. And this is when they assign a name to that storm, like Tropical Storm Arthur. Once the wind speeds go above 73 miles per hour, so 74 miles per hour and greater, it is now considered a hurricane. And there are different categories of hurricanes that I'll talk to you about in this video too. And the different category is going to be based on the speeds of the wind. The greater the wind speed, the more damage you'll obviously see from wind, but also the greater storm surge you'll probably see. And a storm surge is when the water level rises and can cause coastal flooding. And then if you have heavy rains on top of that, that can even increase the flooding to a greater level. So tropical depression, 30 miles per hour, that's when they're going to start tracking the storm and keeping an eye on it to see whether it's going to dissipate, which means break apart, or get stronger. When it becomes anywhere from 39 miles per hour to 73 miles per hour, it's a tropical depression. It gets a name. You can expect strong winds and you can expect heavy rains. And then anything greater than 73 miles per hour, so 74 miles per hour above, you're going to be considered a hurricane. Those winds are going to be sustained, torrential rain. Storm surge can get in excess over 20 feet high, meaning the water level can raise over 20 feet high. And this is where you're going to start to see significant damage to property, possibly loss of life in a larger area. So the other things you might hear on the news, the other terms you would hear would be watches and warnings. So if they say there's a tropical storm watch or a hurricane watch or a storm surge watch, that means these conditions are possible. So if they say there's a tropical storm watch, that means within the next 48 hours, it's possible your area would be impacted by a tropical storm with those winds between 39 to 73 miles per hour and probably some heavy rainfall. If it's a hurricane watch, again, within the next 48 hours, that means it's possible that your area will see hurricane conditions, wind speeds 74 miles per hour or greater, possible torrential rains, possible storm surge. A storm surge watch, again, within 48 hours, it means you have the possibility of rising water that will move inland. How far inland and what area would depend on where the storm surge watch is issued. When those watches become a warning, they go from being possible to going to be expected, like it's probably happening, okay? So a tropical storm warning means that you can expect within 36 hours wind speeds between 39 to 73 miles per hour and some torrential rains. If it's a hurricane warning, you can expect within the next 36 hours, and sometimes they try to give more advance notice of that if they can. Hurricane conditions, winds of 74 miles per hour or greater, torrential rains. Same thing if you see a storm surge warning. Now you can expect that storm surge within the next 36 hours, that rising level of water moving inland. So a watch, it's possible. Keep an eye on it for 48 hours. Let's see what happens. Your area may be affected. A warning, it's likely, it's expected to come. You got 36 hours kind of to prepare. The other thing that's interesting is the categories in which they measure. And I'm going to include a chart so you can see this. So there'll be an attachment with this chart. And this is called the Saffir-Simpson chart. And hurricanes are rated on a category of 1 to 5. And it all has to do with wind speed. So a category 1 is considered the most mild hurricane. Winds between 74 miles an hour, which is just hurricane status, up to 95 miles per hour. So very dangerous winds, rain, you can expect some damage. Category 2, 96 miles to 110 miles per hour. Now you're getting extremely dangerous winds. You can expect a lot more extensive damage from this. Category 3, 111 to 129 miles per hour. This is going to be devastating damage. This is considered a moderate hurricane, and you can see why as the wind speed increases. Category 4, 130 to 156 miles per hour. This is catastrophic damage. This is considered a severe hurricane. And Category 5, 157 miles per hour and greater. I will include this chart of how hurricanes are measured on today's Google Classroom, and it will be a little bit more detailed in terms of the potential damage that you could expect based on these categories levels. I'm also going to include a video clip of the top 10 costliest, deadliest hurricanes and strongest hurricanes, so you can watch those. That's also kind of interesting. When we get into how hurricanes are named, there's kind of some interesting things there. So I apologize, but I'm going to my different resources here. So depending on the geographical region, depending on the part of the world and what ocean, because hurricanes form over oceans, and we'll get to that tomorrow and move on land, but depending on what ocean they form over is going to determine what they are called. So, for example, the name hurricane, okay, which is what we call these storms, is the name given to the storm if it develops over the Atlantic Ocean, so the ocean that we swim in, so that's why we call them hurricanes, or the Eastern Pacific Oceans. So those are the two places where they would be called hurricanes. If it forms in the Western, North Pacific, and the Philippines, they call them typhoons. A typhoon and a hurricane is the same storm forming the same way, but they're given different names based on their geographical location. If it forms in the Indian and South Pacific Oceans, they're called cyclones. So a cyclone, a typhoon, and a hurricane, same kind of storm, okay? Formed the same way, needs the same conditions to happen. It's just based on the geography. Australia even has their own unique name for them. They call them willy willies, which is kind of fun and cute to think about, but not the storm themselves. So I'm going to move to the names of the storms, and I have a couple of different resources here that I'm going to read. So I'm going to read through some of these. So when they become tropical storms, they get assigned a name, and that helps them track storms. So initially, scientists didn't provide names to storms, and it became very confusing about what was happening where. So they had to come up with a system. So I'm going to kind of read through some of this information. So I apologize if my eyes are going up. I'll also include in the Google Classroom today a list of the possible hurricane names and a list of the names for this year. You can kind of see if your name is on it, which is kind of fun. So it says, until the 1950s, tropical storms and hurricanes were tracked by year in order in which they occurred during that year. Over time, it was learned that the use of short, easily remembered names in written as well as spoken communications is quicker and reduces confusion, especially when you have a season where there's multiple storms. In the past, confusion and false rumors resulted when storm advisory broadcasts from radio stations were mistaken for warnings concerning an entirely different storm located hundreds of miles away. So just by identifying the storm by the year they happened, if there's multiple storms in multiple locations, it was causing confusion and it was causing unnecessary panic. So they realized they had to come up with a different system. In 1953, the United States began using female names for storms, so females only. 1978, both male and female names were used to identify Northern Pacific storms. And then in 1979, the Atlantic hurricanes adapted the same system of alternating between male and female names. There's actually a strict procedure from a meteorological organization that's used to come up with these names. So there's a list of male and female names that are used on a 6-year rotation. So they have 6 years worth of names and they rotate them every 6 years. If a storm is extremely costly, extremely damaging, or extremely deadly, that name gets retired. They don't feel like it's appropriate to use that name again. So, for example, there won't be another Hurricane Katrina because it caused too much loss of life. There probably won't be another Hurricane Harvey or Maria for loss of life or for costly reasons as well. In the event that more than 21 names occur in a season, because it's a list of 21 names, then they go to the Greek alphabet. So there have been some examples of when the whole list has been gone through, because remember, once it becomes a tropical storm, they name it. That tropical storm may never become a hurricane, but that name's already used. Once it becomes a tropical storm and gets a name, there's been times, and it could happen this year because we've already named a storm and it's only May, that you go through the whole list and then you start the Greek alphabet. So then it goes like alpha, beta, and it's kind of interesting to see that. And I remembered that happening a few times in my lifetime. Not often, but it has. So I'm going to just read this other blurb about how they name the storms. It says, hurricanes also get their own individual names, like new babies. In the Atlantic, it began during World War II, when military meteorologists had to figure out how ships and planes could navigate around the hurricanes. So that's kind of interesting. I didn't know that. They initially tried several naming strategies, including naming hurricanes after the girlfriends of the people who were observing them. It's kind of neat. I didn't know that either. But by 1953, meteorologists started to alphabetically, again, using only female names, And by 1979, they alternate male and female names. And that's something I forgot to mention, that they do go alphabetically in order. So kind of interesting just to go through some of that information, some of that history of the different names that hurricanes are given based on geographical location, how hurricanes are named. And again, you can have some fun looking to see if your name's on any of the lists, when names are no longer used, if they're costly or deadliest. And also to, just kind of clear up some of that confusion between tropical storm, depression, hurricane, and watches and warnings. So today's just an intro of some of this information. And again, I'm going to put some video clips that I think you'll enjoy and include the chart of how the hurricanes are measured and how the hurricanes are named. So have some fun just looking and exploring. Watch the weather every day and see if you hear the news of any tropical depressions. So again, you'll know that's when something's forming in the ocean, 38 miles an hour or less, but they're watching it. When it becomes a tropical storm, now you know what that means, 39 miles to 73 mile per hour, and they give it a name. Or a hurricane, and you know what that means, 74 miles per hour or greater. And you'll also know now, if you hear the terms typhoon or cyclone, that those are the same thing as a hurricane. It's just geographical. So if you hear of any typhoons, hurricanes, cyclones, or even tropical depressions or storms forming, let me know so we can track them together and I can keep us updated on it. So as always, have a great day. Enjoy this information that I'm sharing with you. And please make some time for yourself. It's supposed to be beautiful out there. So please get out and enjoy the day. Talk to you soon.